They said David Monroe was the kind of man who could fix anything, except maybe his own heart. He lived in a modest cedar cabin tucked behind a line of birch trees, just off the lake in northern Michigan. The kind of place where the wind smelled like pine, the coffee stayed black, and everybody in town waved whether they liked you or not. David, now 68, had earned that respect. Decorated Marine, served in Desert Storm, lost his first wife to cancer at 45, didn't drink, didn't gossip, built his own porch swing, and read the paper every morning before the sun hit the water. But he was a lonely man. That is, until Evelyn walked into his life. It was 2001. David was 47, just starting to feel the weight of silence at home. Evelyn Rains had just moved to town. She was quiet, elegant, the type who baked banana bread for the neighbors without being asked. She wore scarves even in the summer, taught piano lessons at the community center, and volunteered at the church food pantry every Thursday like clockwork. Their paths crossed at the Veterans Hall. She was helping serve meals at the annual memorial cookout. David asked for seconds. She smiled. He forgot the taste of his food, but remembered her eyes, gentle, almond-shaped, with something unspoken behind them. They married a year later. A small ceremony. Just close friends, a few veterans, and Pastor Michael's officiating in front of the lake. David felt like he'd been granted a second chance, a gift from God to a broken soldier. And for 2 decades, he and Evelyn built a quiet, sturdy life together. They grew tomatoes in the summer, listened to old country records, and watched snow fall from their window every Christmas Eve with steaming mugs of cider in hand. People who knew them would often say, if there's ever been a real love story in this town, it's them. They didn't have children. Evelyn explained, early in their marriage, that a complicated medical history made pregnancy impossible. David never questioned it. She had scars, physical and emotional, from a difficult past she rarely spoke about. Born in Ohio, raised by strict religious parents, moved around a lot. Some stories, she'd say, don't deserve to be retold. David respected that. He knew all about locked doors and buried ghosts. And besides, he didn't need the whole story. He had her. That was enough. Their 20th anniversary was simple, just the way they liked it. Steaks on the grill, a bottle of red, and their favorite song, Forever and Ever, and men playing softly in the background. Evelyn gave him a framed photo of the two of them on the lake. He gave her a necklace with a heart-shaped locket engraved. Still yours. Still always. That night, as they lay in bed, David whispered, "You've been my peace, Ev." In every way. She kissed his forehead and said nothing. But her hand lingered on his chest a little longer than usual. They never had children. That was never the plan. But in the quiet spaces of their Michigan home, the crackle of the fireplace, the Sunday morning pancakes, the dog-eared books passed back and forth, David and Evelyn built something bigger than a family. They built a rhythm, a life, a home. In their first winter together, the furnace broke. Snow piled up to the windows, and David spent 2 hours cursing in the basement, trying to fix it. Evelyn brewed hot cider, wrapped herself in 2 sweaters, and sat beside him with a flashlight. You know, she said, lips blue from cold, we could just pretend we're in Alaska and call an adventure. David looked up, sweat freezing on his brow, and for the first time in years, laughed so hard he forgot he was cold. There was the summer they rebuilt the back deck. Evelyn insisted on using reclaimed wood. David called it a money pit. She called it character. They argued, teased, compromised. It took 6 weekends and 1 smashed thumb, but when it was done, they sat side by side on new old planks, drinking lemonade, watching the lake shimmer. I never thought I'd have this, David said quietly. What? A crooked deck? Evelyn teased. No. This, he said, nudging her shoulder. Peace. He never asked about her family, and she never offered. It wasn't that they were avoiding truth. It was that they both knew some wounds were old, deep, and best left undisturbed. Instead, they built forward. In 2014, David had his first heart scare. It wasn't a heart attack, more like a warning shot. He collapsed while pruning the hedge, and Evelyn found him face down on the lawn. She rode in the ambulance, held his hand through the ECG, never left the hospital room. She brought crossword puzzles, argued with nurses, made sure he got sugar-free Jell-O and the TV remote. "I thought I lost you," she whispered one night. "You can't get rid of me that easy," he rasped, voice thin, smiling. But that night, while he slept, Evelyn stayed up and wrote a letter. Just in case. A letter he'd never read. A truth she feared would destroy everything. She folded it neatly, sealed it, and slipped it into the box under the bed. For their 15th anniversary, they rented a cabin near Traverse City. No Wi-Fi, no schedule, just two people in love. They played cards, cooked pasta, went fishing, and didn't catch a damn thing. Evelyn fell asleep in the hammock with a book on her chest, and David watched her for 20 quiet minutes, marveling at how contentment could sneak up on a man who thought his life was already over. He had fought wars. He had buried friends. But with Evelyn, he healed. Sometimes they danced. Not in ballrooms or weddings, but in the kitchen when the mood struck, Evelyn barefoot, David humming off-key. Once during a thunderstorm, they lost power. Evelyn lit candles, turned on the old record player, and pulled David into a slow waltz. Rain pounded the roof. Lightning flashed through windows. "I'm not much of a dancer," he muttered. "Then let me lead," she grinned. And he let her. They had fights, of course. About money. About Evelyn's refusal to throw out expired spices. About David forgetting to pay the water bill. But they always circled back to each other. Always found the quiet again. Because in all the noise of the world, they had made a pact. Unspoken but real. This house, this life, this love, it would be their sanctuary. Until one day it wasn't. Before she was Evelyn Monroe, she was just Evan. A quiet boy with delicate hands and a voice that never deepened the way the others did. Growing up in a one-story farmhouse in northern Indiana, Evan learned early that difference was dangerous. His father was a trucker. Tough, distant, sharp-tempered. His mother a woman who kept her eyes down and her mouth shut, especially when her husband drank. Evan's first memory of shame came at age 6, caught playing with his sister's old Barbie dolls in the attic. His father didn't shout. He didn't even speak. He simply picked up the dolls, threw them into the wood stove, and said, "Boys don't play pretend." But Evan did. Every night, in secret, when the house was quiet and the air was heavy with the scent of cornfields, he became someone else. At 14, he found an article online titled "What It Means to Be Transgender." He read it 3 times, then cried for the first time in years. Not because he was scared, but because he finally had a name for what he was. At 16, he tried to run away. He made it to a Greyhound station in Indianapolis before a cop picked him up and sent him home. That night, his father broke his nose. That was the last time he ever cried in front of anyone. At 18, Evan left for good, with nothing but a duffel bag, $200 in cash, and a fake name written on a napkin, Evelyn Rains. He crossed the border into Canada 6 months later with forged documents, sleeping in shelters and doing odd jobs. There, he met a kind nurse named Marjorie who not only saw him, but believed him. Marjorie helped him get his first real job at a bookstore. Then she helped him start hormone therapy. Over 2 years, Evan slowly faded and Evelyn emerged. She didn't become a woman. She became herself. In Canada, she learned to disappear. At first, it was survival, sleeping in shelters, keeping her head down, using a name she barely believed belonged to her. Evelyn Rains. She'd scribbled it on a napkin the night she crossed the border. It felt like fiction, like playing dress-up. But every day, she wore it until it fit. She got work at a used bookstore in Toronto. Quiet place. Dusty shelves. The owner never asked questions, and the customers mostly kept to themselves. Evelyn found peace in the silence of paperbacks and the soft shuffle of shoes on old wooden floors. She shelved books alphabetically. She restocked the coffee stand. And she waited for the fear to fade. Then came Marjorie, a nurse in her 50s with sharp eyes and a voice like warm butter. She came in every Thursday for medical thrillers and jasmine tea. One day, she noticed Evelyn's shaking hands as she rang up her books. "You all right, sweetheart?" she asked. Evelyn nodded, but Marjorie didn't believe her. The next week, she brought a pamphlet. "For when you're ready," she said, tapping it twice. Then left. It was from a clinic in Montreal. One page described hormone therapy. Another showed a map. Evelyn read it 10 times before hiding it under her pillow. She started therapy 3 weeks later. The first injection, testosterone blockers, made her cry uncontrollably for 2 hours. Not because of pain, but because for the first time in her life, her body felt like it was finally listening. She would walk home afterward with her hand pressed to her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. The bookstore owner never asked about the bruises on her arms. Marjorie always had soup ready after every visit. There were setbacks, of course. She got followed once by a man who had seen her take her hoodie off at a bus stop. She never wore that hoodie again. She was spat at on the subway, told she was disgusting in a women's bathroom. But she also got her first hug from a stranger who called her ma'am and didn't flinch. She learned how to apply mascara without shaking. She learned to walk differently. She learned to stand taller. 2 years into her transition, she looked in the mirror and didn't see Evan anymore. She saw Evelyn. Not perfectly, not always, but enough. The surgeries came next. Montreal in January. Freezing wind. Long wait lists. She shared a hospital room with a woman named Celeste, who'd come from Alberta and cried after waking up because, as she put it, "I've waited 40 years to feel this way." It was painful, the kind of pain that doesn't make noise, only silence. But when Evelyn was wheeled to the mirror for the first time after healing, she bit her lip and whispered, "Thank you." To God, to herself, to every part of her that had survived long enough to be here. She sent Marjorie a postcard with one sentence. "You saved me." A month later, she packed her things and boarded a bus headed west. No destination, just distance. She ended up in Michigan by accident, a lake town with open skies and closed mouths. The kind of place where no one asked too much, and that suited her fine. She dyed her hair darker, bought a new scarf, rented a one-bedroom above a gift shop, and for a time, she let herself believe she could stop running. Until she met David. The surgeries came later. Painful, exhausting, expensive, but the pain didn't compare to the freedom of walking down the street and not being stared at, of trying on a dress and having it fit not just her body, but her soul. She was still afraid. The world didn't change overnight, but Evelyn learned to wear kindness like armor and quiet dignity like a crown. She moved to Michigan in 2001, choosing a small lake town where no one knew her past. She worked at a gift shop. She joined the library book club, and on the 4th of July, she brought peach cobbler to the town barbecue. That's where she met David Monroe. They started small. Coffee on Main Street. A walk by the lake where Evelyn wore a wide-brimmed hat and talked about how she'd always wanted to live near water. David listened more than he spoke, but when he did, his voice was soft, almost reverent, as if he couldn't believe this woman was talking to him. Their second date was an antique fair in a neighboring town. David bought an old compass missing its needle, and Evelyn laughed. "Why buy something that can't tell you where to go?" "Because sometimes it's nice to get lost on purpose," he replied. That made her quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that holds more meaning than words. Evelyn found herself drawn to his stillness. He didn't fill silence with noise or questions. He never asked about her past, and she never offered. But at night, alone in her rented apartment above the florist's shop, she'd stare at her reflection in the bathroom mirror and whisper, "What are you doing?" She had promised herself she would never get close again. That love was a luxury she couldn't afford with a history like hers. But David's hands were gentle. His laugh was clumsy and real. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She felt, wanted. Still, the fear never left. She avoided intimacy as long as she could. Blamed headaches, early shifts, too much wine. But David never pushed. He would brush her hand with his fingers or kiss her knuckles after dinner and say, "We've got time." And she wanted to believe that. One night, during a thunderstorm, the power went out while they were cooking. David lit candles, Evelyn poured wine, and they sat on the kitchen floor eating half-cooked pasta and talking about everything, except the one thing that mattered most. "I used to be someone else," she nearly said. But instead, she asked him about his first wife. David's eyes softened. "She was tough. Smarter than me. Fought cancer like it was a full-time job." He paused. "She made me promise not to give up on joy." Then he looked at Evelyn and added, I didn't think I'd get another chance. Later that night, when he held her hand beneath the covers and whispered, "You make me believe in good again," Evelyn turned her face away and cried silently. Not from guilt, not from shame, but from the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, she could keep this. When he asked her to marry him 3 months later, on a foggy morning by the lake with pancakes still on the griddle, she said yes before she let herself think too hard. Because thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to running. She told herself that maybe love could be a kind of truth on its own. And as they stood before Pastor Michael's that fall, surrounded by veterans in mismatched suits and neighbors holding homemade bouquets, Evelyn kept her eyes on David's, steady, kind, believing. She told herself she would find the courage, one day. But not today. Not when her whole life was finally beginning. He was kind, awkward in a sweet way, asked questions about her favorite books, laughed at her terrible jokes. He offered to help her change a flat tire the next week, even though she didn't need help. He never once asked about her past. And for a while, Evelyn believed she had escaped it. But the past never really leaves. She kept a box under their bed. Inside, one photograph of Evan at 16, wearing a flannel shirt and a bruised cheek. A hospital bill from Toronto, one unused vial of estrogen, and a single envelope with a letter, the one she had planned to give David one day, but never found the courage to. She had almost told him the truth after his heart attack in 2014. She sat by his hospital bed for 4 nights, watching machines beep in rhythm with his breath, and wrote the letter. But when he opened his eyes and smiled and whispered, "You stayed," she couldn't bring herself to risk losing that love. It wasn't the first time she'd tried to tell him. There was that night during their 10th anniversary. They'd rented a small cabin by a frozen lake and made a fire that crackled into midnight. David had fallen asleep on the couch, a book slipping from his fingers. Evelyn sat beside him with a mug of wine, the letter already in her coat pocket. She reached out to wake him, then paused. His chest rose gently. His hand twitched in a dream, and she realized this was peace. She didn't want to shatter it. She kissed his temple instead and whispered, "Not tonight." Then there was the church potluck the summer after. An old woman named Clara had brought a box of community records for the volunteers to help sort. Evelyn's breath caught when she saw a familiar name scribbled in faded ink. Evan M. Raines, 1995 incident report. Clara laughed it off. "Can you believe some of the troublemakers we used to have in this county?" Evelyn smiled politely and slipped the document under a stack of hymnals. That night, she baked 2 banana breads and dropped them at Clara's porch. A thank you and a plea for silence. Once, she even rehearsed the confession in front of the mirror. She stood in their bedroom one rainy afternoon, staring at herself, the letter trembling in her hand. "David," she began, "there's something I need to tell you. It's about who I was before I met you." But the words sounded foreign, the syllables too sharp. She tried again and again, until her voice cracked and her knees gave out, and she sank to the carpet with her back against the dresser, whispering, "He won't love you after this. He won't see you." She burned that version of a letter. There are dozens of versions, some hopeful, some terrified, one written like a fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a boy who became a girl and learned to love a man who deserved the truth. That one she folded into an origami crane and buried beneath the rose bush in the backyard. Every time she got close to telling him, something would stop her. His laugh. The way he'd call her Ev without thinking. The creak of the porch swing at sunset. The warmth of his hand on hers during church service. Moments too tender to risk losing. She even tried giving him clues, once gifting him a novel by a trans author and watching his face as he read. He didn't flinch, but he didn't ask questions either. He closed the book and said, "That was powerful." And Evelyn had smiled, nodding, even though her heart was pounding, hoping it meant maybe, just maybe, he could understand. But he never asked, and she didn't volunteer, because silence in their home had always been a kind of safety, not from each other, but from everything outside. They had built something sacred, and Evelyn told herself, again and again, if he ever truly sees me, maybe it won't matter who I used to be. But deep down she knew, one day, that silence would crack, And when it did, there would be no turning back. She never wanted to lie. She only wanted to be loved as she was. But Evelyn knew, some truths don't just change lives. They end them. At night, Evelyn would lie awake long after David's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep. She'd watch the ceiling fan spin and wonder how many more years she could carry a truth that felt heavier with each passing season. Sometimes, when he snored softly or reached out for her in his sleep, she'd cry silently, grateful for his touch, terrified of the day it might vanish. She rehearsed it dozens of times. The confession, in the mirror, in the car, once even aloud, in the middle of a thunderstorm, whispering to the wind as if it could practice forgiveness for him. But every time she got close to telling him, fear clawed its way up her throat and silenced her. What if he looked at her differently? What if he never touched her again? What if the man who had once called her his peace now saw her as a threat to everything he believed made him a man? Evelyn had read stories. Trans women who were beaten, outed, killed, not by strangers, but by the people who once said they loved them. So she told herself lies to survive the truth. That their love was strong enough. That what they had built was real, even if the foundation had cracks she could never point to. And each time she felt that box under the bed calling her name, she'd press a hand to her chest and whisper, just a little longer. Maybe he'll never have to know. 2 months later, David collapsed while chopping wood behind the cabin. A heart episode. Not his first, but worse this time. Evelyn found him face down near the stump, still gripping the axe. He survived barely. At the hospital, the doctor told him his kidneys were failing. If they didn't find a compatible donor soon, dialysis would become his new life. Evelyn offered to be tested. I want to help you, she said. We're family. I need to try. David smiled weakly and squeezed her hand. You've already saved me once, Ev. But something strange happened after the test. Evelyn came home quiet, distant. She said the hospital messed up the paperwork and that she wasn't a match. When David asked for more details, she changed the subject, said she'd call them back and sort it out. David didn't think much of it at first, but 2 days later, a letter arrived from a clinic. It wasn't addressed to him, but he opened it anyway. It was thin, just a lab results summary and a name at the top. Evan M. Rains. He blinked, then blinked again. There had to be some mistake, but the birth date matched Evelyn's. So did the home address. The letter said the patient was male. David sat in his chair for nearly an hour, just staring out at the lake. His heart monitor beeped softly behind him. The house was too quiet. When Evelyn got home that evening, she found him sitting in the dark, holding the letter. He didn't speak, and neither did she. Not yet. That night, David couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling fan as it spun above their bed. Evelyn breathed slowly beside him, her body turned toward the wall. His mind churned with questions and memories. 20 years, 20 birthdays, 20 winters waking up next to the same woman. The same laugh, the same touch. How much of it had been real? And how much had been a story he wanted to believe? By sunrise, something had shifted in him. It wasn't just betrayal. It was something colder, deeper, a cracking of the floorboards beneath the life he'd built. David Monroe, war veteran, churchgoer, loyal husband, no longer knew the woman lying beside him. And before the week was done, she'd be dead. David didn't ask Evelyn about the letter that night. He didn't have to. The look on her face when she saw it clutched in his hands said more than words ever could. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. She stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds before slowly setting her grocery bags down on the counter. Then she walked into the kitchen like nothing had happened. She made tea, cinnamon chamomile, his favorite, but she didn't bring him a cup. She just stared out the window while the kettle whistled, her hands trembling at her sides. And David? He said nothing, because something inside him had broken, and not in the way that makes you cry. No, this was the quiet kind, the cold kind, the kind that sits behind your rib cage like a stone. The next morning, he waited for her to leave for her usual Thursday church volunteer shift. As soon as the door clicked shut, David opened the closet. Top shelf, wooden box, locked, same one she'd had since they married. She always kept it close, but never opened it around him. Said it was family stuff, old letters, her mother's Bible, things she didn't want getting dusty. But David was a Marine. He could pick a lock blindfolded. Inside, he found what he wasn't ready for. An original birth certificate from Ohio. Name, Evan Michael Rains. Sex, male. A Canadian medical file dated 1996. Gender reassignment surgery, Montreal. A letter from a man named Tanner, dated 1999. Ev, I pray you found peace. I hope you're somewhere no one knows your name. David's hands shook. He couldn't breathe. He dropped to the floor, knees buckling like they had when he heard his first wife had cancer. But this pain? It was different. It was betrayal sharpened into something surgical. The next few days blurred. David didn't sleep. He didn't speak much either. He watched Evelyn from across the dinner table like she was a stranger, someone wearing his wife's face, her voice, her perfume. But none of it felt real anymore. She tried to pretend. She asked about his blood pressure. She asked if he wanted to watch Jeopardy. He didn't answer, because his mind wasn't in that room anymore. It was 20 years back, to their wedding day, to the honeymoon he now couldn't remember without questioning everything, to all the nights she'd whispered, "I love you," and he'd said it back. And what did it mean, really? Had she tricked him? Or had he just never looked close enough? On the 5th day, he drove to Tanner's address. It was on the envelope. A small farm outside Kalamazoo. Rusted mailbox. Overgrown path. A man in his 60s opened the door, squinted, and said, "You must be David." David froze. Tanner nodded slowly. "She told me about you once. Said you made her believe in things again." They sat on the porch. No small talk. Just silence and wind. Then Tanner spoke. "She didn't do this to hurt you, you know. She did it to survive." David clenched his jaw. "She lied." Tanner nodded. "Maybe. But if you knew what she lived through, the beatings, the conversion therapy, the nights she prayed to wake up in a different body, you might understand." David stared at the trees. They called her a freak. Her father tried to drown her in a bathtub when she was 17. Said he'd rather have a dead son than a filthy thing. She ran. Changed her name. Changed her body. Then met you. And for 20 years, she was finally safe. David drove home in silence. Evelyn was sitting on the porch swing, reading. She looked up hopeful. He walked past her without a word, into the house, and locked the bathroom door. For an hour, he stared at his reflection in the mirror. Who was he? A husband? A fool? A man who couldn't see the truth, even when he kissed it every morning for 20 years? And worse, was he still a man now, or just some old soldier who'd unknowingly loved another man? That thought, that one, more than the lying, more than the hiding, is what started the rage. Not loud, not explosive, just cold, controlled, like preparing for a mission. That night, he began moving things. He emptied the gun safe. He made sure the locks worked. He stopped taking his blood pressure pills. And in his notebook, the one he used to track with deliveries and grocery lists, he wrote one sentence. A man who's been lied to for 20 years is not the same man anymore. Evelyn knew. She may not have seen the notebook, or the empty gun safe, or the missing blood pressure pills. But she knew. A woman doesn't live beside a man for 20 years without knowing the temperature of his silence. And David Monroe had gone ice cold. She tried to reach him the way she used to, with warmth, food, familiar routines. She made his favorite soup, played his favorite Patsy Cline record, left the Sunday paper folded neatly by his chair, even put on the green sweater he once said made her eyes look like spring. But David didn't flinch. He sat by the window, carving a piece of oak that didn't need carving. His hands were steady, his face unreadable, and when she touched his shoulder, he pulled away like her fingers burned. That was the moment Evelyn knew this wasn't just suspicion. He had found something, and she didn't know if there was still time to explain or if it was already too late. That night, Evelyn stayed up, staring at their wedding photo on the fireplace mantel. She whispered, "Please don't hate me." She wanted to talk. She needed to. But every time she opened her mouth, she saw the war in David's eyes. Not just against her, but within himself. It wasn't just about what she was. It was about what he thought that made him. The next morning, Evelyn placed a folded envelope on the kitchen table with his name written in careful cursive. Inside, her full confession. "I should have told you. I was afraid. Not of you, but of losing you. I never lied to you about how I felt. Just about what I thought you could never understand. She told him everything. How she was born Evan. How she ran away at 19 after her father tried to have her institutionalized. The surgeries, the hormones, the years in hiding. And finally, how she met him and saw a chance at life. I didn't want to be a trans woman. I just wanted to be your wife. David never opened the letter. He held it, stared at it, and slid it back into the drawer, unread. Because at that point, no explanation would undo what he felt had been done to him. By the end of the week, David began preparing in subtle ways. He canceled his doctor's appointment. He cleaned his tools. He sharpened the hunting knife he hadn't touched in years. When Evelyn asked what he was doing, he said, just clearing old things. There was something in his voice, not anger, but finality. Evelyn backed away slowly, like a deer sensing the rustle of a predator too close. That Sunday, they sat in church like always. But this time, David didn't bow his head during prayer. He watched Evelyn instead, her lips moving, eyes closed, hands folded. And all he could think was, she doesn't belong here. Not beside me. Not beside God. This was all a lie. I was made a fool. They'll all laugh when they find out what I've been sleeping next to for 20 years. It was no longer about Evelyn. It was about his pride, his manhood, his shame. After the service, Pastor Michaels approached. Everything all right, David? You've been quiet lately. David forced a smile. Just tired. The pastor looked over his shoulder at Evelyn and nodded. She's been a good wife to you. God knew what he was doing when he brought her to your doorstep. David's jaw clenched. He wanted to scream. You don't even know who she is. But instead, he said nothing, because in his mind, the sentence was already written, and it would end in blood. That night, Evelyn cooked dinner like normal. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, steamed carrots. She sat down across from David and watched him eat in silence. He chewed slowly, methodically. Fork, knife, sip. Fork, knife, sip. Halfway through the meal, he finally looked up. His eyes locked onto hers. Who else knew? He asked flatly. Evelyn froze. What? He set his utensils down. Who else knew what you were before me? She swallowed. No one. Just Tanner. And now you. David leaned back in his chair. 20 years, Evelyn. 20. I buried men for less than that in Iraq. Her eyes welled. I never wanted to hurt you. I loved you. He slammed his fist on the table. Don't say that word to me. Don't you dare. She stood. So, did he? There was a long silence between them. A silence more brutal than any scream. Finally, Evelyn said softly, If you want me to leave, I will. I won't fight you. I'll go tonight. David stared at her. Something in his face flickered. Rage, grief, confusion, all colliding. But his voice came cold. You already left. A long time ago. I just didn't know it was Evan I married, not Evelyn. She covered her mouth and ran upstairs. David didn't follow. He returned to his chair, stared into the fire, and whispered to himself. This ends soon. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of evening where the sky turns gold for 5 minutes before swallowing everything in gray. Evelyn stood by the bedroom window, suitcase half-packed on the bed behind her. She had chosen silence for 2 days. Not out of pride, but fear. David hadn't spoken to her since the night of the confrontation. But his silence had changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It was empty, like he'd already said goodbye. She folded her nightgown, her hands trembling slightly. The wedding photo still hung above the dresser, crooked from when she'd bumped it 2 nights ago. She hadn't straightened it. There was no point anymore. Downstairs, she heard the screen door creak open and close. David had gone out back, maybe to the shed, maybe to get air. She didn't care. All she knew was, if she didn't leave now, she never would. She walked down the stairs slowly, suitcase in hand, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her car keys were already in her purse. A friend in Traverse City had offered her a room for as long as she needed. She paused at the front door, took one final look around the house that had been her sanctuary for 2 decades, and turned the knob. That's when she heard the footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate. Then his voice. Don't go. Evelyn turned. David stood at the bottom of the staircase, shotgun in hand. Not raised, not yet. But not resting either. She froze. I wasn't going to hurt you, he said, almost to himself. I told myself that 100 times. David, You lied to me for 20 years. His voice was hollow. You call that love? Evelyn stepped forward gently. It was love. I never. Don't, he shouted, eyes glassing over. Don't make this harder. You don't have to do this. He looked at her suitcase. At what point were you going to tell me? 20 more years? Or were you planning to die with the lie? I was going to tell you the night of your heart attack. But you almost died and I couldn't. I did die that night, Evelyn, he said, voice cracking. You just didn't bury me. She stepped closer, hands slightly raised, not in fear, in love. I'm still me. I'm still the woman who made you soup when you were sick. The one who danced with you on the dock. The one who... You're not a woman, he snapped, the words like knives. You're Evan. You tricked me into loving a lie. She didn't flinch. I never tricked you into loving me. I just prayed that once you did, maybe the truth wouldn't matter anymore. For a second, David wavered. The shotgun dropped a little. His lip trembled. Then a car passed on the road, and its headlights lit the living room window for a brief second. And in that flash, Evelyn saw something shift in his face. Not anger, not pain, humiliation. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about what this made him. What people would say. What kind of man loved someone like her? She knew the next words might be her last. So she said them carefully. I never wanted to be a man. I just wanted to be yours. David blinked, and then everything went white. The neighbors 3 doors down said they heard it. One sharp crack, not a hunting shot, not a warning. Just one, echoed across the lake like thunder without rain. Evelyn fell instantly. The shotgun slipped from David's hands and hit the floor with a hollow clunk. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He just stood there, staring at the woman. No, the person he had loved for half his life, bleeding out on the oakwood floors they'd sanded together the summer of '09. He called 911 himself. I just shot my wife, he said calmly. She lied to me. For 20 years. She was never really my wife. The operator tried to keep him talking. He stayed on the line. When police arrived, David was sitting on the porch, hands folded, shotgun beside him, blood on his boots. He didn't resist arrest. Didn't say a word when they cuffed him. Didn't look back at the house as they drove away. Inside, Evelyn's suitcase still sat by the door. Still open. Still unfinished. Like the life she had tried to live. The case caught fire within 48 hours. By the end of the week, it was front-page news across the country. War veteran kills wife of 20 years after learning she was transgender. The case ignited national debate. Some saw David as a cold-blooded killer. Others believed he was a betrayed husband pushed beyond his limits. Even his quiet Michigan town split in two. Some mourning Evelyn, others quietly pitying David. But the law didn't whisper. It moved swiftly. David Monroe was charged with second-degree murder. No bail. No plea bargain. He sat in county jail for 6 months before the trial began, refusing every TV interview, every book deal, every offer to set the record straight. In court, he wore a gray suit that didn't fit like it used to. His hair had gone whiter, his frame thinner, but his stare was steady. He never cried. The prosecution's case was cold and clear. Premeditation. The gun was taken out 3 days before the shooting. Motivation. A note found in his truck that read, "She made me a fool." A man doesn't live with that. Opportunity. No sign of struggle. No signs of threat. They painted David as a man who chose pride over love, who let shame turn into hatred, who killed not because he was afraid, but because his masculinity couldn't bear the weight of her truth. But the defense? The defense told a different story. They brought in psychologists who testified that David had suffered a trauma-induced dissociative break, that learning the truth after 20 years triggered something akin to PTSD. His military past, his first wife's death, his heart condition. They said he wasn't violent. He was shattered. And the biggest argument of all, he wasn't told the truth. He didn't consent to the life he was living. The courtroom held its breath. In the gallery, there were 3 distinct kinds of people. Those who saw Evelyn as a deceiver, who believed David had been manipulated and mocked by the one person he trusted most. Those who saw her as a woman, someone who had spent her life fleeing violence, only to die by the hands of the man she loved most. And those who didn't know what to believe anymore. Evelyn didn't have a family to attend the trial, but her friend from Traverse City, the one who offered her shelter, did come. Her name was Carla Jennings, a retired nurse. She took the stand on day 4. Ev was scared. She knew David found out. She was packing to leave, to let him heal, to protect herself. She never raised a hand to that man. Not once. And he ended her. Then she held up Evelyn's letter, the one David had never opened. The judge allowed her to read it aloud. The courtroom wept. David didn't move. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with a verdict of guilty of voluntary manslaughter, citing emotional disturbance. David was sentenced to 14 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 8. Some cried injustice. Some said it was too lenient. Others said, it's the best anyone could do with a tragedy like that. But the real sentence wasn't written on paper. It was the silence that followed. David didn't appeal, didn't grant interviews. He spent his days in a medium security facility near Ann Arbor, working in the prison garden and attending chapel every Sunday. He never spoke Evelyn's name again. But once, in the fall of his 2nd year inside, a chaplain asked if he believed she ever truly loved him. David looked out the window at the leaves changing and said, I think she did. I just don't know if I loved her or the story I needed her to be. Outside, in the cemetery by the lake, Evelyn Raines was buried under her chosen name. No headstone, just a small plaque with 3 words. She tried honestly. It had been 7 years. David Monroe was now 72. His beard had grown gray and uneven. He walked with a slight limp, not from prison fights, but from old age and untreated arthritis. Inmates called him Grandpa Dave, though none dared ask too much. He kept to himself, mostly tending the tomatoes and feeding stray cats that hung around the prison yard. He had never spoken about Evelyn. Not once. Not to the guards. Not to the prison chaplain. Not even to his appointed therapist. But one morning in spring, just after sunrise, a young woman named Rachel Adams, a freelance reporter from the Lansing Herald, was granted a rare interview. She had written to him for months, never expecting a reply. But one day he did. One line, if you still want the truth, I'll talk. But I'm not asking for sympathy. The interview took place in the prison's small visitation room. No cameras, no audio, just a notepad, a pen, and 2 cups of black coffee. Rachel was 31, ambitious, sharp, but soft-spoken. David looked older than she expected. Smaller, too. Not the man she'd read about in those angry internet threads. Not the monster. Just tired. He sat across from her, eyes clear but weathered. She began slowly. Mr. Monroe, I won't ask you to relive every detail, but I don't want to ask you something no one's asked on record. David raised an eyebrow. Go ahead. Do you regret it? He stared at the wall for a long time. So long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. I regret not opening that damn letter. Rachel didn't speak for a moment. She just let his words hang there in the quiet room, between the 2 coffee cups and the silence that had followed him for years. Then she asked, gently, do you think she would have forgiven you? David gave a small, bitter laugh, not mocking, just tired. Forgiveness was never the issue, he said. It's what I did to myself that I can't take back. Rachel leaned forward. Can I ask you something hard? David nodded. Do you believe Evelyn was a woman? He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the window, where the prison yard stretched out under gray morning light. Then, in a voice rougher than before, he said, I believe she was who she said she was. I just wasn't man enough to accept it. He looked down at his hands, gnarled, shaking slightly. I was taught to see the world in absolutes. Male, female, right, wrong. God made us a certain way. That's what my father said, what the Marines said, what the damn church bulletins said every Sunday. He paused, but Evelyn lived in the in-between. She was soft where I was hard. She loved in quiet ways, tea and music and silence. And I let the world convince me that softness was weakness, or worse, deception. Rachel scribbled a note, then looked up. Do you think you ever really loved her? David closed his eyes. I loved what I thought she was. Then I hated what that made me feel. And then, he exhaled slowly. Then I realized the love was still there. It just had nowhere to go. Rachel hesitated, then said quietly, "My brother is trans." David opened his eyes. "He's a good man," she continued. "Funny, loyal, saved a kid from drowning once. But my father didn't speak to him for years. Said it was an abomination. Took cancer to soften him." David blinked. "And now they talk. Not about everything, but about baseball, politics, Sunday dinners." She smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what people can live with when they choose love over pride." He didn't respond, just nodded slowly, the idea turning over in his mind like a stone in a river. A few minutes passed in silence before Rachel flipped to her last question. "If Evelyn were here right now, and you had one more chance, what would you say?" David looked away again. His voice, when it came, was a whisper. "I'd tell her I'm sorry it took me too long to see her. That I was afraid of the world knowing I loved someone like her, when I should have been proud." He paused, then added, "I would have danced with her one more time, even if the power was out, even if the rain was pouring. I would have let her lead." Rachel's eyes welled. She closed her notebook. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe." As the guard came to escort him out, David turned back and said softly, "Call me David." The man who couldn't hold grace when it was handed to him. He talked then, not for the world, not for Rachel, maybe not even for Evelyn, maybe just for himself. He told her about the night he met Evelyn at the 4th of July cookout in '01, how she brought him peach cobbler and laughed at his bad jokes, how she helped him write eulogies for fallen Marines, how she held his hand through heart surgery, and how none of that seemed to matter the moment he found out what she used to be. "I didn't kill her because she was trans," he said flatly. "I killed her because I didn't know who I was anymore when I found out. I was raised a certain way, taught that certain things were absolute. A man is a man, a woman is a woman, no in-between. But she lived in the in-between, and she made it beautiful until I looked too close." Rachel asked if he thought he deserved forgiveness. He laughed bitterly. "I don't think forgiveness is something you deserve. It's something you beg for, knowing damn well you might not get it." Then she asked him something else. "If you could go back to that night, would you still pull the trigger?" David looked away. His hands, gnarled from age, trembled just slightly. And then he said, "I wouldn't touch the gun. I'd walk out the front door and let her keep the house. Because living with the truth hurts. But living without her, that's been worse." Rachel left in silence. She never published the full interview. Not because it lacked substance, but because some stories lose power when told too loud. Instead, she wrote a short column titled, "The Man Who Killed What He Didn't Understand, and Then Understood Too Late." It ended with one line. "Love isn't about what someone was. It's about who they've become, and if we can accept that." David Monroe died quietly in his sleep in his 9th year behind bars. No family, no fanfare, but the chaplain buried him with a Bible Evelyn had once gifted him, still bookmarked at a page with her handwriting. "You are more than the story you tell yourself." He was laid to rest in a simple grave beside hers. No flowers, just grass, wind, and silence. But perhaps that was enough.